I'm Don Smith. I'm a senior security professional for Qwest. I work on the backbone. I'm also a volunteer Internet Storm Center handler. I receive early notification of vulnerabilities, techniques, and other security information, partially through the NSP and also through the ISC, Internet Storm Center. I coordinate and analyze responses with other security professionals. I analyze packets and malware, review POCs, exploits, vulnerability announcements, etc. I'll get into a little more of that at the end of the talk. I started in computers 28 years ago in the Army, carrying around a portable computer. It was an analog computer. It took 10 people to carry it, but officially it was portable. Worked for Control Data for 11 years. Got my first security certification there. I contributed to a lot of different security groups, tools, and standards. RFC 3871, SANS NT, and incident handling guides, Firewall Toolkit, TIS Firewall Toolkit, ASM, NISPOM Chapter 8. The teams I work with are all over the globe. We are connected via email, and we use PGP and things. I think most of us have never met, and I think coming to NANOG meetings, you get to meet and put a face to people that you've never seen, but you might have communicated with for years. So I think that's a good thing. Got weird UDP fragments. The NSP security and the ISC handlers of this were getting a lot of reports on some weird UDP fragments. It first occurred in October for a couple of days, then it died down. No one really solved the riddle of what these packets were, where they were coming from, or why they were coming. So when it came out again, we sent out a notice on the handler's diary requesting packets from people all over the world. And we also sent a note to the NSP list saying, watch for this traffic, see if you can figure out what's going on, what it is, what's happening. This is a very busy slide. You don't really have to look at all of it or understand all of it. However, I created an Arbor FCAP, which I looked for traffic from the source IPs, UDP traffic. That very small set of IPs was coming in from all over our net, 5 different peering locations, from LA to New York. I assumed and suggested to many people it was spoofed. It can't come in the Qwest net from everywhere around the world and not be spoofed. Okay, maybe there's some way, but I can't come up with a way it could. So I asked other NSP members to look at Arbor or other tools and see if they could figure out where the traffic was coming from. Several other people reported it was coming in from multiple peering points also. Could this be some kind, Could this be some kind of DNS fingerprinting? That was my initial theory. I thought, gee, someone's trying to fingerprint the DNS servers. It's been done a few times. Fingerprinting a DNS server is an attempt to figure out the OS, the application, etc., of the DNS server. The simplest method of fingerprinting a DNS server is to do a bind chaos version query. That's been done by professional researchers for legitimate reasons and by worms and hackers for malicious intent. There are a lot of OS fingerprinting tools. It can be done. Was this a new one? That was my question. We discussed it. Oh, there's a security tip. In bind 9, if you set up a zone, you can block chaos. Simply set up a chaos zone, make a root hints file that points to dev null. And when people try to do version or authors out of the chaos domain, they'll get a failure. It doesn't look like it was a fingerprinting attempt. According to RFC 791 and Mike Poor, another ISC handler, who told me several times, fragments that are not the initial fragment should not produce a response from any OS. If the initial fragment arrives to an OS, after the timeout, the fragment, they should send back an ICMP fragment error of some sort, timeout error. But if you don't get the initial fragment, your OS should not respond. All these fragments were starting at the 512th byte, so no OS should respond to this. So I don't think it's DNS fingerprinting. Was it a direct attack? Could be a direct attack, maybe. It would consume a lot of OS resources. If you sent fragments to an OS, the OS has to hold on to those fragments, waiting for the rest of the fragments to arrive until its fragment timeout, which is OS dependent. If you sent enough, you might be able to impact a DNS server. It really depends on the OS and what their timeouts are set to. It hit only authoritative DNS servers. That was kind of a surprise and a little bit of a shock to us. Everybody who reported it saw it coming towards authoritative DNS servers. That makes it look like it's very targeted. That implies prior recon, but many of the sites reporting it said there was no prior recon. Okay, so this is DNS. If you want to find authoritative servers, you don't have to go to the site or to the server to get it. You can use a recursive, open recursive server or your own local DNS server to find the authoritative servers for any domain you like, without ever once contacting the actual authoritative server itself. We've come up with sort of an explanation. That's why it says explained with quotation marks around it. George Bakos, another ISC handler, Internet Storm Center handler, reconstructed the packet. He took the fragment piece off, put a new Ethernet header on there using a tool called NetDude, and analyzed it, and it was requests for dot. So it was just DNS requests for the list of root servers, 2 authoritative servers. Gerald White of Alentent, and Judy Novak of SourceFire did similar analysis and tore apart the packets, and we discovered some stuff. The most interesting piece probably was that if you look at the 6th and 7th byte, it's 0040 on these packets, and if you switch those bytes around as HTONs would have done, you'll find that that's just the don't fragment flag. It's not an offset into a frag. So it looks like the person who wrote the tool failed to do an HTONs when they wrote the tool. A system that was sending the traffic is discovered. Someone found one. They did not get the tool, but they did see the outbound packets. The system that was discovered had been compromised, was owned, controlled by someone else. We still haven't seen the tool, so if anybody gets the tool, I really want to see it. I'd really like to see the source code to it, because I'm pretty sure someone forgot to do an HTONs. But if you get a copy of the tool, we'd like to play with it. Further on that explanation, 83.102.166.0 was seen as the source of these packets. It's believed that that might have been a reflective attack. I took and Googled a set of the IPs that were being used in that range, and several of them were shown up in hacker IRC logs. It's possible that someone in that range upset another hacker who then fired off a tool to try to take out their network. That's what it looks like. By spoofing the source IP address and using authoritative servers, you get a 10-to-1 data amplification. You also get to hide behind authoritative servers. No one's going to block authoritative DNS servers. It just doesn't happen. One, maybe. Not a lot of them. So these guys were hitting a lot of different servers. It's not going to get blocked. This attack would have, if it worked, could have been used for quite a while before we'd be able to shut it down. It's also hiding the actual attacker's IP. There's no way to see that easily. All you're seeing is a spoofed IP, and then it comes from authoritative servers. Because of the HTONs flaw in the tool, I believe this was a handcrafted tool, or a tool that handcrafts the packets, not a LiveNet-based tool. There is a DNS Smurf tool, which is being used in a very similar fashion to bounce attacks off authoritative DNS servers. This is not that tool. It's not even a predecessor to that tool as far as I can tell. All of the ISC handlers and several security professionals on the NSP list were very helpful in this area. We've discussed this. Kyle Hawkins, one of the handlers, and I sent over 100 emails back and forth on this one topic just to try to figure out what was going on. The packets are clearly crafted, but we're still not sure if the packets are spoofed. Kyle and I disagree on this. Qwest Architecture Security Team performs lab tests on most of the network elements that get into our network. Free, publicly available tools can be used for nearly all of this testing. You don't need the biggest, baddest test box in the world to do this. Testing is fun and interesting. I like testing. In one case, we repeatedly crashed one of the network elements with the 3-year-old Protos SNMP test suite. That's a 3-year-old tool that's out there in the public that all of you could download tonight and start running if you wanted to. Obviously, someone in that network group is not running it. We repeatedly crashed it. We accessed another without a valid login, and then used a local exploit and rebooted the box from a non-privileged account. Some of the vulnerability tools I use is Nessus, which is a vulnerability scanner, Nmap, which is just a port scanner, Protos. It's actually a suite of tools. They have SNMP, LDP, and several other tools. And that's a fuzzer, which is basically it attempts to emulate different portions of a protocol in such a fashion as to go to the boundary conditions. Making one area too large, making another area too small, make a length of 0, those kind of things. So they're what I call protocol fuzzers. These tools are all publicly available, and they all work pretty well. When we do testing of network elements in our lab, the vendors are notified, but no vulnerability information is released to the public. We also must recommend mitigation steps. If we find a vulnerability, as security, just finding a hole isn't good enough. We have to try to figure out a way to mitigate at least the effects of the attack. And then we have to test that mitigation and see if it actually works. Among other things, I also get escalated attacks. So some attacks are escalated to me directly to assist. If it's an attack against a Qwest router, there's a real good chance I'm going to hear about it. They're going to get me involved, no matter what time it is or day it is, etc., etc. New and unusual attacks. Because I work with SANS, the ISC group, and the NSP group, I get a lot of information about attacks, and new attacks that are done within Qwest space or from Qwest space are often reported to me so I can help to analyze them. Say, oh yeah, well we've seen that one before. That's a DNS Smurf tool, we've seen it. So it's in many cases stuff we've already seen, in some cases it's stuff we've never seen before, and it's interesting. I like packets. But I'm not an expert, not at everything. So I say don't be afraid to ask. If you see something that you've never seen before, ask someone. Don't be afraid. Find someone to ask. Start talking about it. Early notification. I'm often one of the first people at Qwest and even in the SP community to find out about a new vulnerability or exploit. Some of those are because of the tools I write. Some of those are because being connected to the ISC, the NSP list and things, we get early notifications. Some of those come from certs. Communication is the key. And speaking of key, you're going to have a PGP key signing. I recommend everyone get PGP and get your key signed. You've probably heard it a dozen times or 1,000 times by now, but without PGP, a lot of the communication we do could not be done via email, but it is today because we all have PGP. Do not violate NDAs or confidentiality agreements. If you want to get notified and you get notified and you're the leak and someone finds that out, you'll probably never be notified again. whether it's internal corporate, whether it's external from a friend, don't violate the confidentialities. Trust is both inherited and earned. You can get an inherited trust from working at Qwest or working at Sprint or UUNet. Someone may tell you something because you work there. So you get an inherited trust. If you violate their confidentiality, you will not earn that trust and you will not be trusted anymore. Once I receive an announcement of a proof of concept or vulnerability, I review the announcement. I read the certs, etc., and then I notify ISC, the Qwest cert team, the NSP list, and various Qwest engineers as needed. On 1/11/05, I was the handler of the day at SANS, and that's also known as Black Tuesday or Microsoft Super Patch Day. I spent almost the whole day reading first Microsoft sites, then going out to the various cert sites to read about the vulnerabilities, going out to the various other security sites that talked about those vulnerabilities, and compiled literally 40 pages or so of information into 2 pages of a diary that a lot of people used to evaluate whether or not they had an issue with the latest Microsoft patch. Of course, we didn't evaluate whether that patch was going to work on your Windows system, but we did evaluate what the vulnerabilities were. It's not possible. It's not possible to know it all. Teamwork works. That's why you guys are here. You're here to meet other people, to make teams, to make friends, make acquaintances, so you can contact other people when you need them. Ask the experts. If you have a question about buying, get a hold of Paul Vixie or someone over at ISC and ask them what's going on. The Internet Storm Center and the NSP list are very good resources. It's mine. Are very good resources. We share a lot of thoughts and ideas, packets, observations. Everything is shared there. We talk about stuff. And it's done in such a fashion that, for the most part, if you ask the right questions, someone out there knows the answer. If they don't, they'll start looking it up. They'll figure it out. They'll get an answer for you. A lot of the things that Qwest does security-wise today, like black hole filtering, etc., came from other people's work. Chris Morrow over UUNet and other people developed black hole filtering. Not me. We're using it. It's their idea. We share ideas on the NSP list that literally are ways to help secure your network. Ideas about security in networks. We don't always all agree, of course, but there's not nearly the flame ratio there is on the NANOG email list. Questions?
I just wanted to make a slight plug for the NSP BOF tonight. And Don, I'm going to ask you to explain what NSP stands for. The security BOF tonight is one you want to come to if you're interested in what Don has to say and all this stuff.
Network service providers. It's just service providers. That's all it is. It is a vetted and closed, trusted list. To get on it, you have to know other people who can vouch for your trustworthiness. Not for who you are, not for what you do. Your job is assumed to be your job. But you must be trustworthy. Some of the announcements we've seen have come out early on the NSP list. Not all of them, but it's not unusual for a vendor to let us know there's a problem on the NSP list before it occurs anywhere else, except via, of course, your specific contracts.
Barry Green from Cisco. Don, thanks for doing the talk for one. On the proactive security testing, do you know of any other of your peers out there, service providers, who are doing similar sort of stuff?
Yes. In fact, several of the large ISPs have labs similar to my lab, or similar to our labs, because Qwest has several labs. And they do security testing. In one case, during the TCP reset, which is also known as the BGP reset, I produced a tool that I actually shared with other ISPs so they could test to see which of their applications were vulnerable to the TCP reset sequence number guessing tool. And that was actually an old BGP tool that I took and modified to guess sequence numbers correctly. I know that several of them do. I don't know about tier 2 or tier 3, but I know many of the tier 1 providers do have labs. They test code for weeks on end before they put it in their networks.
Do you think it would be worthwhile to have a off session on something like that and get different providers who are doing it, present to each other?
That might be very interesting. I like to learn about what other tools people are using. I mean, I'm based primarily in the public domain, free source tools. I'm a C programmer and I can write some of those things. But it'd be interesting to see what else people are using. There's always tools out there that I haven't looked at.
Do you have a website with a list of those tools for those of us who might be interested in performing some of the types of tests you're talking about?
I don't have one. Yes, I'd say go to PacketStorm. There's several other places you can go. They're one of the most popular ones. They've got a lot of the vulnerability information and stuff out there. Tools are ultimately very easy to find, especially exploit tools. For a talk I gave 2 years ago at university, I had 20 pages from one site of all the exploit tools this one site had. Now, I don't know if they were all legit or anything. I didn't try them all. It was 20 pages of just a list of tools.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Donald and Virendra. Got a twofold question. The first one is this effort is extended to Asia Pac or EMEA, and secondly, how does this information? I understand this is NSP-centric effort. How does this information trickles down to enterprise and the other maybe smaller organization? I mean, I'm sure we can, folks in that area can make use of this expertise. Kind of be valuable.
That was a long question. I'll start with the first one. The NSP list is not U.S. centric. We have people on there from all over the world. I know that NANOG's name is North American Network Operators Group, but I believe you guys are fairly open. I've seen people here that weren't from the North America, as far as I can tell. And I believe there's people here from Asia, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not a closed list in the nature of, say, the U.S. CERT or Department of Homeland Security or any of those things. It's not a U.S. effort. It's certainly got a lot of U.S. professional people on there, but there's people from all over the world. So that part is not an issue. As to filtering down to the enterprise, most of that vulnerability announcement kind of stuff is done by the vendors, hopefully through CERT-CC or an ISCC. In those cases, if you have a large enough enterprise and you contact the CERT team and you start to work with them, they'll give you, in some cases, the ones that they can, an early vulnerability announcement. They may not give you all the information you need, but they may tell you what you need to do to fix your problems or the areas that you should be looking at. I've heard a lot about how do I get vulnerability announcements, how do I get them early. Honestly, most of the exploits we see today aren't from zero-day vulnerabilities. They're from stuff that's 2 months or 6 months old. Almost every XP box that I've seen that's been hacked in the last 6 months was hacked with something that was 3-4 patches ago. It's not anything new. Vulnerability announcements are a good hot topic for the NSP security BOF, and I believe it will probably be discussed because we've been talking about it a lot lately.
Got one question to add, if this works. In your testing, how easy do you find it to work with the vendors of the equipment that you're testing to feed back information and get it fixed?
Money works. Money works real well. When we're going to buy your product, if Qwest is considering buying your product or buying a bunch of your products, we put it in our labs and we test it, both for performance and security. If it doesn't pass, if it can't do the job it's supposed to do and do it fairly securely, we won't buy it. So that works real well. We've announced to the vendors vulnerabilities that have in fact actually stayed unpatched and unfixed for years, but then we didn't buy that gear either. So.
Thank you. Dave Dietrich is our next speaker. Are you here?